Morning, everyone. I think we'll make a start there. That's 10 o'clock. So thank you very much for joining our webinar today. Let's say I'll shortly hand it over to Mark, who will be taking you through the session today. Let's say thank you very much for joining. We'd love this to be an interactive session, so please drop any questions or queries or any thoughts at all into the chat, and Mark will pause at a few points throughout the session, and we'll try and answer them as best as we can. So without further ado, I'll pass you on to Mark.
Morning, everyone, and thanks for coming along. I'm going to take you through this webinar. I think it'll last about 25-30 minutes each or so. As Ryan says, we'll stop for questions through. So if there's anything you want to kind of talk about, then stick it in the chat, and I'm sure Ryan can prompt me to let me know there's something there. So without further ado, let me just get started. So my name is Mark O'Donnell. I'm the head of analytics and applications here at Bridgeall. I've been with the company for 6 months, but I've been around in the industry for almost 30 years. Excuse me, and most of that time has been within business intelligence and integration space. This is the agenda for today. We're focusing on business data and some of the problems and challenges around managing it. I'll outline some approaches that you can take to deal with it, talk about some of the benefits from doing that, and then round off with a bit on the kind of available technologies. The agenda is deliberately high level and inevitably will pass over some fairly large areas quite quickly. If there's interest in particular areas, then feel free to get in touch after, or as I say, stick something in the chat and we can maybe discuss here just now. It's a huge area, and I'll try and be as succinct as possible, but it's not always possible to do that in a short webinar. So I guess first of all, a bit about Bridgeall. Who are we? We are based in Glasgow, right in the centre in George Square. We have 42 staff at the moment, but we're growing. And that's continuing to get bigger every month. And we were established at the end of 2002, which means that we have just literally celebrated our 20-year anniversary, for which we had a very nice away event, which was good fun. What do? We advise, implement and support technology solutions to help improve business. And within Bridgeall, there are 4 key business areas. Modern and intelligent workplace, where the focus is on improving employee productivity and satisfaction. Managed IT service and support covers security, infrastructure and cloud services. Analytics and applications, that's my area, where we support and develop large-scale bespoke software solutions and cover business intelligence and management information and data-related projects. And finally, Trevi, our suite of product solutions focused on the water utility sector. We are a 10 times Microsoft Gold partner and a Microsoft Content Services Group preferred partner, one of only 26 worldwide. We are ISO 9001 and 27001 certified, and we hold the government-backed Cyber Essential Plus certification. This is a selection of our customers across private and public sectors and across a number of industry verticals, such as manufacturing, housing, national government, NHS, utilities and events. So without further ado, let's move on to the kind of main topic today. So business data, let's define it first. What is it and what's the problem? Business data is any information that is generated by a business or its customers that can be used to support things like business operations, decision making and strategic planning, etc., etc., etc. It includes a wide range of types of data such as customer, financial, sales, marketing, operational, anything you can think of really. And it tends to be produced from specific types of systems. So for example, CRM, HR, e-commerce and website all produce specific different pieces of business data. Over the last few years, a number of specialist providers have seen success in offering these kinds of systems. Systems like Xero or Sage for finance, Shopify or WooCommerce for retail, Microsoft Dynamics or Salesforce for CRM. Each of these is seen as a best of breed solution to a particular business problem. When a business is looking for the best way to fill their needs, it's fairly common nowadays to turn to one of these providers who all offer software as a service, SaaS offerings that are very easy to get started with. Decisions about using these systems can often be done independently. So, for example, the finance department will tend to work out what fits their needs. And this can lead to a landscape of point solutions, all of which satisfy specific operational needs. However, the independent nature of these systems can lead to some problems, and these problems often show up in the data. So what kind of things am I talking about? Typically, it's data silos, where data is stored and managed in isolated systems or departments within an organization. This means that different departments or teams may have their own data repositories, which are not easily accessible or shared with other departments or teams. And this can create several challenges for the organization, including inefficient processes, things like duplication of effort, limited visibility. It can be difficult to get a complete picture of what's happening across the company, and ultimately poor decision making. Excuse me, poor decision making. If you can't see all of your data, how are you supposed to make decisions based on it? Increasingly, businesses are capturing more and more data, and the value of that data is directly related to how usable it is. Businesses that are able to effectively manage and leverage the data can gain significant advantages over competitors and have the visibility to improve their overall performance. So why would we be concerned, and why would we want to tackle it? Well, the value of business data lies in the insights it can provide to help businesses make better informed decisions. What can we do with better data? So we can increase efficiency and productivity. We can use it to review processes and resources, aim to reduce costs and improve productivity. We can improve decision making. We can create better customer experiences. We can mitigate risk, and ultimately all of this delivers some level of competitive advantage. Excuse me. By leveraging business data effectively, businesses can gain that competitive advantage. These are just some of the many benefits to an organisation from having complete, accurate and consistent data across the business. It's probably also worth highlighting at this point, one of the more recent innovations that's had a high profile, currently really everybody's talking about it, is artificial intelligence, machine learning. While I'm not really talking about these as part of this webinar, the models that need to be built to support these techniques, they leverage the data that any organisation holds. And the more accurate, complete and consistent that information is, then the better the outcome. Any AI or ML model is only as good as the data that you actually put into it. So what's the kind of typical current approach? What do we see when we are talking to customers? Well, most companies have an administrator or an admin team. That's their job, isn't it? Take an account from the sales system, recreate the account in the finance system, issue an invoice, keep the contacts up to date. And a lot of companies now have got MI teams, and typically they tend to have the largest hard drives in the whole company, because all they do is download data so they can pull it together for reports for different people. Typically what we come across are things like this. So manual processes that involve downloading data, usually to Excel, and then performing some kind of processing on that, which leaves sort of dependencies on individuals, etc. Semi-automated report production. We see local definitions of KPIs and metrics, stuff that's unique to each department or team. One area's definition of profit is not always the same as everyone else's definition of that. We see manual sharing of data, usually via email. Reports are sent out and archived and stored on hard drives. And we see all of that done manually. Email is the biggest kind of conveyor of all that stuff. And then when it comes to doing things like historical reporting, it tends to be derived from lots of different versions of that same thing that's been sent out, spreadsheets stored on drives, etc. Tools like Excel and Access are really powerful and facilitate this approach to a point by removing some of the technical barriers. They can handle some large amounts of data, but that just encourages an approach which uses them. So the question then is, why does all of that stuff happen? And it's usually because the data is inconsistent across systems. So for example, in your finance system, you may talk about user X, but in one of your other systems, that user might actually be user 72. And it requires manual effort to actually integrate that data. And to be honest, it avoids dealing with the actual root cause. It's actually easy and it's cheap to just get somebody to take two lots of data in a spreadsheet and manually put them together. But the real reason behind it, the deeper reason behind it, is that there's no real overview thinking, there's no architecture, and especially data architecture. No one's really thought about that. And ultimately, it means there's no big picture system, no big picture of how systems fit into things like customer journeys or a customer lifecycle. So what challenges does this bring? Well, it brings lots, but I'm going to talk about, I guess, two types. So operational challenges, first of all. So what happens if you capture a sale on your website, you create an invoice on your finance platform, you fulfill an order, your operation system, and you manage issues in customer services? How do you ensure that all of those processes are consistent? If you're selling to a company and they change the customer contact, how do you know it's been updated across all of your systems? And then the second part of that is, well, a whole business view, a cross business view. Once the dust settles on a sale, how do you know it made a profit? Can you take into account all the effort that went into it? The dispatch effort, the customer services effort? Is it better to continue selling a profit that may generate a lot of complaints or something that makes up the majority of your returns? Most businesses, or many businesses, operate on a gut feel to that kind of thing, which is exactly the opposite of being data driven. The aim for any data is to be accurate, complete, and well managed. And there is a need to ensure that your data is consistent across systems. It's accurate, particularly with respect to timeliness, and it's complete. And the question that really you should be asking yourself is, do you trust the data? If you don't trust the data, how can you make decisions on it? If you're going to follow the data, if you're going to try and make decisions on it, but someone's going to say, well, I'm not sure that's right, then it defeats the purpose of all of this. Addressing these challenges requires a data integration and reporting strategy that can bring disparate data sources together, providing a unified view of business performance. This can help businesses make better informed decisions and optimize operations. So far I've painted a picture of problems, lots of problems. And the question really is, how do we resolve them, or how do we make them better? I think at this point, lots of people are hoping for me to say, we just press this button here. That's unfortunately not the case. There's no magic button that makes all of this go away, or any kind of super technology that actually makes this go, makes this better, despite what many vendors would actually tell you. But for any of these things, there's actually three main components. So the first component is business process. The truth is, some companies are better at this than others, but with many of them, the need to answer immediate operational questions tends to drive business process, and those processes aren't always aligned. They tend to get dragged out of shape. I'm not really going to talk about this too much, because it's not really what we're here about. But the point I'm really trying to make with this is that, this is the first thing that you need to address in any business. You shouldn't be trying to engineer around poor business processes. The second bit is the data approach. Data needs to be consistent across the business. So for example, if one part of the business uses a different regional breakdown to others, there's going to be a problem. And there are approaches using things like reference data and master data that can help with that, but it needs to be considered. And then finally, you have the technology approach, and we'll come on and talk a little bit more about this. But it's important to recognise that different technologies will bring different solutions and problems. But the key bit here is that it should really only be tackled after the first two, after the business process and the data approach have been at least properly understood. So everyone will be pleased to hear that I can't talk about data without mentioning data governance. Not going to talk about it in depth, but it's worth mentioning. So what is data governance? It's a critical component of effective data management. By establishing clear policies and processes for managing data, organizations can ensure that their data assets are accurate, secure, and used appropriately. This can help to improve decision-making, increase efficiency, ensure compliance, and reduce risk. So data governance is the sets of policies, procedures, and practices that organizations use to manage their data assets. Key points are these four here. So data ownership. There should be clear ownership of all the data in an organization. Data quality, it should be understood, and there should be processes for ensuring that it actually can be improved and for understanding the quality of it. Data security is fundamental to all of this. It needs to be built in and thought about from the start. There's various pieces of legislation around that, but it's fundamental. It needs to be thought about up front. And then finally, data privacy. It's about protecting individuals and making sure that you remove a lot of the risk that's associated with personal data from your organization. Those are the four key components, but I would recommend that these policies actually are kind of extended to include a policy for data integration. And that's really about setting standards and using things like data dictionaries and catalogs, and ensuring that data is properly cleansed and stored. And then secondly, data usage. So policies round about how data is actually accessed and how it's shared and how you collaborate, and ultimately to ensure that it's used ethically and responsibly. The more effort you put into this, the better and consistent anything that relies on data will be. A lot of people roll their eyes with data quality and data governance, and it's actually really quite an important process to master and to get the best out of your data. So moving on, what's our approach? What did we take? What did we talk about and what did we see out there? So start to get a little bit more into the kind of system side of things. What approach would we take to integrating systems? So I'm going to split this out into broadly two types of integration here, and they can both be used to solve different problems. So I'm going to talk about near real time in this, as opposed to real time, just to differentiate between them. We talk about near real time because it's actually quite hard to do real time, and it usually means things are really expensive. And 9 times out of 10, near real time is actually good enough for the vast majority of applications. So there are two main types of integration that I've put here on the slide. Event-based, that's stuff that happens in near real time, and involves messages being sent from one system to another. Maybe not direct, usually via some kind of plumbing. So for example, as soon as there's a sale on your website, then an order is created in the order system, because an event or a message has been sent between them. So one sale equals one order in that case, and that would be one event. Conversely to that, if you had 1 million sales, then it would mean that there would be 1 million events created to make 1 million orders on your order system. And then the second part is time-based, or probably more commonly referred to as batch. That's the kind of end of day type transfers where all sales are transferred to the order system. And it means that instead of getting the 1 million events or 1 million messages that you got in previous approach, you would get one transfer regardless of the number of sales. It's much more efficient for large numbers, but it tends to have a kind of time delay element to it. I'm just highlighting these because it's probably important to understand that when we talk about some of the technology stuff in a bit. Okay, so moving on to integration itself. So, excuse me. Usually integration processes move data directly between platforms without there being any kind of manual intervention. Something will trigger an event or a schedule, and it will result in a data transfer between systems. Typically, this flow will move something like an order from your website to an order fulfillment system. The frequency and volume of this type of integration would be determined by business requirement, So for example, should the order be generated immediately, or can the business wait for it to be done at the end of the day? And this type of integration is actually pretty well supported with the kind of systems that I was talking about earlier. So those best of breed SaaS systems. Most of them will support integration with other SaaS providers. So for example, you can buy a service from Shopify, which will see orders automatically sent to Xero. And almost all of the systems offer an API, which means that if you have a technical capability, you can actually do all of that integration yourself. So there's always a temptation to integrate directly between providers, as I said in the last slide. But I'm suggesting something slightly different here. Because what happens when you decide it's time to move on from your finance platform? Okay, maybe that doesn't happen every day, but you may choose to partner with different vendors to do sales, for example. Or you want a website sale to trigger not only an order, but also to do other things like, for example, dispatch and engineer. In other words, you want to trigger a number of actions as a result of one event. The direct integration approach that I talked about in the last slide can still be used, but it starts to become more complex in those scenarios. So what I'm suggesting here is that, and how we would approach it, is that we would use an integration platform. So each service on the landscape would integrate to the integration platform. So data flows to the platform and then out again to the desired service. What does that mean? That means that an integration, so in my last example, an integration between Shopify and Xero becomes actually two integrations. It's an integration from Shopify to this integration platform, and then an integration, and then from the integration platform back out to Xero, for example. And there are a lot of benefits to doing this. Obviously, increased modularity, which makes it easier to add in and remove components. It's easier to test it because you really only have to test the bit that you're actually changing. And what it means is you can actually accelerate change because you can do it in a much more modular way. And probably critically, those more complex integrations actually become a bit more implementable. So one single event on any platform can trigger multiple actions on other platforms without you having to actually go back and amend that original platform. So it becomes a lot more flexible. And what we would typically do with this is we would use this as a kind of starting point, and then we would take that and we would extend it and use it as an enabler for business intelligence. So if all of your data, or if much of your data is passing through that integration platform, then it's actually quite a simple and straightforward thing to extend that platform to take that data and either serve it to a business intelligence service or to store it somewhere that a business intelligence platform can access. So for example, take that data and put it into a database where something like a reporting tool can actually access. And since the integration platform is working 9 times out of 10, it'll be working in near real time, then it enables an element of near real time business intelligence that you can do based on the messaging that's happening on this platform. And so the business intelligence service is actually enabled by the integration platform. So whatever technology or type of integration that we are looking at, the approach that we would take would actually be the same. So whether we were looking at a business intelligence platform or we were considering a data integration platform, the approach is pretty much the same. It's these key steps. So identify and understand the sources, deep dive into the details of how they work. With some of the SaaS systems, it's often via documentation and of their APIs. Then the ingestion part is about doing the engineering work to get that data onto the integration or data platform. You know, the connection, the setup, the actual security components that have to be configured. Then the middle step, processing. So, you know, process it if required. If it's a data platform, if it's BI oriented, then often it's about modeling and aggregating data to get it to the right level of detail. If we're talking about integration platforms, then it's often about dealing with, you know, formats and differences between systems, you know, sort of manipulating XML or JSON between systems so that it's fit for the next step. Then, if required, we store it. So that could be anything. You know, store it into a database or onto a file system, or even into a, you know, a data lake or lakehouse, or somewhere that it's accessible to something like an analytics engine, or for the last part, the delivery part of it. So the delivery part is all about accessing the data. So from a BI perspective, that's using a reporting tool or an analytic platform, or even machine learning or artificial intelligence. And for your kind of more integration, your more sort of operational focused stuff, then it's about pushing that into the target platform on using the appropriate API to get data done. And obviously, all of this goes together with other processes like, you know, orchestration and logging and monitoring across the whole platform that kind of make it supportable. There's a whole kind of suite and infrastructure of surrounding components that are necessary to make all of this stuff work. Okay, so I'm going to kind of launch into actually talking about some technical elements to this. I don't know if there's any kind of questions that have popped up, Brian, or you there, or you keep an eye on it?
Yeah, no questions yet, Mark. So
okay, I'll just
back on.
Carry on. So we're a Microsoft services provider. It's the tool set that we work with most. So what I'll do is I'll just talk you through some of the kind of key technologies and tools that we see as being key to this. Now, I've only chosen a few. We could talk for probably hours on this very subject, but I've chosen 3 just to briefly talk about. So the first one up is logic apps. I think these are often a kind of overlooked component of the Microsoft technology stack. And why is this good? So as a platform enabler, it's about this is Microsoft's kind of low-code, no-code solution that supports workflows across the cloud. It's a very easy to use platform. It's simple drag and drop interface using standards-based JSON or XML. It allows discrete messages to be sent or received and can be triggered via events or times. So they support the kind of full range of kind of integration. They're very quick to deploy and they're really quite cheap, to be honest with you. Like anything on the Azure platform, cost is always seen as a barrier, but when you actually look at how much these things actually cost in the real world, they tend to be fairly cheap. Using the consumption plan for Logic apps, which is enough for most customers, each step within a Logic app costs fractions of a pence to execute. So you can have quite a lot of functionality for very little cost. They also integrate with other Azure components, things like Service Bus and Event Grid, and that gives these huge scalability. And they can be monitored using things like log analytics to understand exactly what's happening. They support native connections to a huge number of systems, and if you've got something really unique, you can actually develop your own, although I've never really come across that scenario. And finally, they can actually interact with on-prem systems as well via data gateway if required. So using all of these, excuse me, you can actually you can push to a Logic app from a third-party system, or you can set a schedule for a Logic app to pull data from a third-party API, enabling integration without writing a single line of code. If your use case is really complex, they can be combined with Azure functions to allow custom developed functionality to be plugged into a workflow. The Azure functions components can obviously they support, you know, coding, things like .NET and even scripting and whatnot. But to be honest with you, the Logic Apps capability is actually quite surprising. Sometimes it can be, you know, you look at it first, you can think it's difficult to actually do some things, but they're becoming better all the time, and the infrastructure and the kind of surrounding kind of ecosystem that support them is actually very, very good. So that's Logic Apps. Moving on to probably the more heavyweight integration tool in this lineup, Azure Data Factory. This plays the role of the traditional ETL tool, but it can actually do many things. So pipelines allow you to allow data to be pulled on batch from a number of source systems. It can reach into on-prem or operate in the cloud. It'll deliver them to the most appropriate place to process them. Orchestration allows pipelines to interact with other pipelines or to be triggered via other events on the Azure platform, even Logic Apps, for example. It will process and deliver data from a variety of formats, from text CSV to Parquet or any sort of variety of database flavors. Data flows continue the low-code, no-code approach to manipulating data with extensive capabilities within Data Factory. And it will work with static or dynamic data sets, and it will scale to huge volumes, multi-terabyte. Complex processing requirements like change data capture or the historical tracking of change can all be performed using out-the-box functionality. Cost of Data Factory depends a lot on the architecture. In my experience, the expensive part of this tends to be data flows, but many customers actually choose not to use data flows, and they prefer to use it as an orchestration tool to deliver data to something like a data lake or a database, and then do manipulation either in something like Python or via something like T-SQL in a Azure SQL database, all of which will keep the kind of cost down in that respect. As a tool for bringing data onto your platform, it's actually really pretty good, difficult to beat. And then finally, I'm going to talk about Power BI. I think no sort of data webinar would be complete without mentioning this at some level. It's the kind of Swiss Army tool of the Microsoft data stack. It can be bent to do almost literally anything. We are talking about it today as a kind of primary delivery mechanism or for an analytical data platform to empower end users, but it's incredibly useful for monitoring what's going on across orchestration or even within your integration platform. You can even use it to keep an eye on your costs. All of the data that's on the Azure platform can be pulled into Power BI. You can actually integrate within Power BI itself. It'll pull data from all your source systems and they can be merged into the model behind Power BI. There are limitations, of course, on doing that. And in that kind of scenario, as with any Power BI scenario, it's really important to get the data model behind it right. That's the key with Power BI, full stop, or you'll run into problems further down the line. Cost-wise, it's really good kind of value for money. Power BI Pro included in the Microsoft E5 license, but if you don't have that, then it's something like £8 per user per month. If you want to push a bit up to premium, there are some advantages to doing it, like increasing refresh rates, and there's other capabilities like data flows and data marts, with a few other bits and pieces that are interesting, like some of the AI capability, and that will double the price. So £16 per user per month will give you premium, and most of those will suffice for most general applications. There are lots of other options, including dedicated capacity, but with this you can actually kind of start small and then scale when you properly need it. It's quite an easy one to pick up and try and understand the costs with before you actually move on to a kind of full scale implementation. Okay, so that's the three tools I was talking about. All that's really left now is to talk about a couple of scenarios and how they might be deployed, just using some of the kind of things we've talked about today, I guess. So first up, this is kind of what I was talking about really in the last slide. This is kind of integration within Power BI to a certain extent. It shows the capability of Power BI to connect to lots of different data sources, and this one is connected to SaaS services for Shopify and Xero, a cloud SharePoint service, and an on-prem database via the on-prem gateway. This pattern could be used for reconciliation purposes or to monitor data quality. you could compare sales with costs, check it's been recorded on your internal inventory and compare with the same period last year, or you could ensure that all of the customers who've ordered are also present on your invoice platform, for example. Probably more of the important thing here is the 3 steps that I've put in the Power BI box. These are the 3 steps that you should always take when dealing with Power BI. Power BI tends to kind of suck you in and making you think it's really quite straightforward and easy. But if you don't take the approach of, ingest, model, and then visualize, particularly the modeling part, then you can end up with some difficult decisions to make further down the line. It's worth getting in front of that kind of thing. The second example I have is really the integration kind of platform that I was talking about earlier. So this pattern's based on what we talked about, and what I've shown here is that Shopify and Xero both integrate to the platform that's kind of represented by that logic app box. Although I've shown it as one logic app here, it in reality would probably be a few of them, maybe half a dozen. And in reality, you might want to use other components in there to increase the robustness or scalability, depending on the size of what you're trying to do. Things like Service Bus or Event Grid. But I've also extended this out to deliver data into a database as it passes through the integration platform, which means that Power BI can be pointed at that Azure SQL server that I've put on the reporting platform, and you can actually see what's happening in real time. So you can see the value of the orders in the last hour, for example. So you may need other components, depending exactly what you do. If you're actually trying to do proper real-time stuff on this reporting platform, then you might need some other components to enable that. But as a general pattern, it's definitely valid. And then finally, what I've done here is I've taken that existing platform, that last one, second example, and I've extended it. So this is the type of pattern we probably see more in the real world. So on the reporting platform, we've got effectively two types of reports that are enabled by this. So one is the sort of near real-time reporting that comes straight off the integration platform that I was talking about in the last slide. So you can see what's happening in the last hour or two. But I've extended that out and I've put Azure Data Factory in. So the thinking here is that you would maybe have like a batch overnight load that pulls, for example, general ledger data from Xero out and pushes that onto your reporting platform so that you can actually do proper financial reporting or reconciliation or whatever it is. But the point here is that it's a kind of mix and match type approach. You can do using logic apps and ADF here to facilitate different types of reporting on the same platform. And that's really that's it. That's all I was really going to talk about today. So just really kind of in summary, we've talked about data and we talked about the value of it, the problems that you might face with disparate systems trying to get consistent processes. We talked about integrating components and why you might want to use a platform approach and how that platform can be enabled with added benefit like the BI stuff. And then really we just talked about the Microsoft components that can be used to do this. And then some of the kind of architectural patterns that you might actually want to look at to sort of support that journey. So that's really the end of the show. So yeah, thanks for paying attention. If you've got any questions, then yes, now's the time to ask.
Thanks, Mark. Sorry, I was on mute. I was chatting away there. There's a couple of questions in the chat there. I think the first question is from Stephen Bollig. So around storing spreadsheets in SharePoint and then kind of connecting to those, or would you recommend that or something more robust like Dataverse?
So yeah, I mean, so I guess any data that's on SharePoint can be effectively used to kind of as a data source for something like Power BI. You're not really probably going to, my approach to that would be that I would model the data out properly. So for me, Dataverse, Power Platform, that's where the strength of that kind of thing lies. And, taking that sort of approach to having model data and then putting into Power BI, you'll get better results at the end of that.
And then Stephen had another question around, can you use APIs to connect third-party services directly to Power BI?
Yeah, you can. It depends a lot on, so Power BI can connect to generic APIs, yes. The kind of, you have to be, I guess in the real world, it's all about that modeling step that I was talking about in the slide. So you can pull data out, but often the data that comes from an API, the shape of the data doesn't easily facilitate reporting. So you have to kind of pull it out into Power BI and maybe do a wee bit of modeling to get it into the shape that makes sense for the reporting you're trying to do.
Also, Sylvia's asking around sort of any recommendations around how to learn Power BI, sort of Power BI training type stuff.
Power BI is, as I was kind of saying, you know, you do get sucked in with it. It's very easy to pick up, and you have to be careful, I guess, when you look at some of the learning material you've got online. It sort of sucks you in a wee bit. It shows you how to pull an Excel spreadsheet and, for example, and then do some visualizations on top of it, which is really useful when that's what you want to do. But in the real world, when you tend to have lots of different data sources, it gets a bit more complex. In terms of training, then we do a bit of that kind of thing. We do a bit of the kind of you know, sort of Power BI quick start type stuff. But I don't really have any kind of proper recommendations. It mostly comes from kind of experience and working with people that are a bit more experienced than you to do it.
Yeah, the only thing to add is probably the Microsoft University stuff at Microsoft Learn. There are kind of a whole bunch of training modules on there. So when you said you tried Power BI's own learning modules, I don't know if that was the ones you were talking about or not, but that's kind of the easiest way to kind of point you to some free stuff. And I think the other thing I add is probably YouTube. There are lots of very helpful IT people out there that have created lots of tutorials and lots of walkthroughs on YouTube that are certainly something that I would know a lot of people use. Julian's asked for a copy of the recording. Yes, so I'll send out a copy of the slides and the recording to everyone later today or early tomorrow at the latest. And then we have one last question from Stephen. Would you still recommend using Excel to gather data, or would you consider using Power Apps?
Definitely Power Apps every time. You can control. The problem with Excel is it's effectively a free and open source, so anybody can put anything into it. So the quality of data that you're actually going to get in your reporting or data platform is always going to be variable. So you have to either build processes around about guarding against that, or you need to control the entry point, and Power Apps is great for that. So you can very quickly deploy simple applications that that will control the quality of your data and allow you to have that level of control that you need across the kind of data platform.
Excellent. Any last questions before we finish up the session? Right. Well, what I'll do is I'll share Mark's contact information as well when we send out the slides. So if you do have any questions direct for Mark, you can send them on. But thank you everybody for joining. I hope that was useful and you enjoyed the session. Yeah. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thanks a lot, everyone.